For 100 cycles, the Galactic Concordance had ruled unchallenged. Their science was indistinguishable from sorcery, their lifespan millennia, their presence serene and absolute. To the younger species scrambling in the dust of their own worlds, the Concordants were less a polity and more a force of nature, untouchable, unfathomable, divine. They did not wage war. They issued corrections. They did not have soldiers. They had celestial arbiters. And when the upstart, noisy, fractious species known as humanity refused to cease their expansion into a sanctified spiral arm, the Concordance simply sent a judgment fleet. It was not an invasion. It was a pruning. The fleet, a constellation of sleek, silent ships that seemed to bend light around them, arrived at the edge of human-claimed space. Their leading vessel, the resplendent Clarity, opened a channel. The Arbiter's voice was a melody of chilled crystal. You will dismantle your forward colonies. You will submit to governance. Your defiance is a discordant note in the symphony. You have one of your solar rotations to comply. From the human defensive line, a ragged collection of bulky, utilitarian warships, only one vessel moved forward. It was an older model, a dreadnought class called the Unyielding Resolve. It was scarred, patched, and broadcast no elegant hails. To the Concordance sensors, it was a primitive brute, a thing of Newtonian force and crude kinetics. A caveman's club. The resplendent Clarity illuminated the Unyielding Resolve with a targeting scanner, a beam of pure, polite light. A final warning. A moment later, the Unyielding Resolve spoke, not with a crystal melody, but with the deafening, physical roar of its primary mass drivers. 24 tungsten slugs, each the size of a train car, were launched not with magnetic fields, but with controlled chemical explosions, a technology the Concordance had deemed quaint and abandoned millennia ago. There was no elegant energy beam, no shimmering plasma, just Newton's third law, rendered in monstrous, undeniable scale. The slugs, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, ignored the resplendent Clarity's energy diffusion shields. They were not energy, they were simply, profoundly matter. The first slug struck the pristine hull. The exotic alloy did not vaporize. It shattered, then liquefied, then vaporized under the transfer of pure kinetic fury. The next 23 slugs did not hit a ship. They plowed into an expanding cloud of superheated debris. The silence that followed on the Concordance fleet channel was not serene. It was stunned. It was the sound of gods realizing, for the first time, that they could bleed. On the bridge of the Unyielding Resolve, Captain Elias Vance watched the tactical feed, his face lit by the distant fireball. He keyed a fleet-wide channel, his voice gravelly and calm. They called themselves gods. Let's prove them otherwise. The stellar debris field that had been the resplendent Clarity glittered like a malignant jewel against the black. On the bridge of the Unyielding Resolve, the crew worked in a silence that was heavier than the usual pre-combat tension. They had just shattered a fundamental truth of the galaxy. Sensor Officer Kira Chun broke the quiet, her voice tight. Concordance fleet is reconfiguring. Their formation is breaking. They're not advancing. They're holding position. Captain Elias Vance kept his eyes on the main viewer. The elegant, leaf-shaped Concordance vessels had stopped their serene glide and were now turning, presenting broadsides, their smooth surfaces beginning to pulse with internal light. They're transitioning from a procession to a battle line, he murmured. They've just moved us from annoyance to threat. All hands, condition red. Load all mass driver batteries. Deploy sacrificial sensor drones, pattern Delta. Across the human fleet, a dozen smaller, older ships moved to form a defensive screen. There were the border guard, ships held together by grit and hope. The Unyielding Resolve was their fist. On the Concordance flagship, the Eternal Dawn, Arbiter Solvanes observed the human vessel. The loss of the resplendent Clarity was not just a casualty. It was an ontological shock. Their predictive matrices, which modeled culture, psychology, and physics as one unified field, had given a 99.997% probability of immediate human surrender. The 0.003% outlier had just fired the first shot. Analysis, Sol Vannies intoned, his three eyes reflecting the tactical schematics. A subordinate, its form shimmering with anxiety, responded. The projectile weapon is a kinetic impactor of primitive design. Our shields are tuned for photonic and particle-based weaponry. The projectiles possess such significant mass and velocity that they bypass our dissipation fields entirely. They are brute force incarnate. A solution? Retuning shields will require 15.3 cycles. In the interim, point defense quantum lasers should be sufficient to vaporize the projectiles before impact. Sol Vannies watched as the human fleet completed its crude, aggressive formation. Then, let us correct this error. Target the lead vessel's weapon emplacements. Disable, do not destroy. We will take it for study. The Eternal Dawn lanced out with a dozen beams of coherent light, precise as a surgeon's scalpel. They struck the thick, armored hull of the unyielding Resolve and splashed. Where Concordance energy weapons melted and sliced, these beams gouged and scarred, but the meter's-thick adamantium ceramite composite, designed to withstand nuclear proximity blasts and particle scour, absorbed the punishment. Smoke billowed from craters, but the underlying structure held. The mass driver batteries, buried deep within the hull, remained operational. Vance felt the ship shudder. Minimal penetration. They're trying for a surgical strike. They don't understand over-engineering. All batteries return fire. Full broadside. Target their flagship's engine array. Again, the unyielding Resolve bellowed its crude challenge. This time, the Concordance was ready. 1,000 pinpoint quantum lasers flashed, intercepting the incoming tungsten slugs. Most were vaporized into glowing clouds of ionized metal. But most was not all. 3 slugs survived the gauntlet. One missed. The second struck a glancing blow, shearing off a graceful sensor spire. The third slammed directly into the Eternal Dawn's primary engine housing. The effect was not a clean puncture. It was a catastrophic conversion of momentum into energy. The exotic matter containment failed in a burst of colors unseen in human physics, and the rear quarter of the Eternal Dawn simply came apart in a silent, gorgeous eruption. Chaos erupted on the Concordance command channel. The unthinkable had happened twice. Their flawless technology was failing against this artifact. On the unyielding Resolve, cheers were cut short by Vance's bark. They're adapting. New energy signatures. They're powering something bigger. Helm, emergency thrust, get us moving. Don't let them draw a bead. The remaining Concordance ships began to glow with a unified, terrifying light. Space itself seemed to warp around their prows. They weren't just weapons. They were instruments of reality itself. The unyielding Resolve heaved to starboard, its massive inertial dampeners groaning in protest as raw fusion thrust pushed the mountain of metal sideways. A heartbeat later, the space it had occupied was not space anymore. A beam of shimmering, silver energy from the Concordance vessel luminous recourse struck there, not burning or piercing, but unmaking. For a nanosecond, the laws of physics in that volume were rewritten. The atomic bonds of reality itself temporarily dissolved. The beam touched nothing. Yet a 4-kilometer swath of a nearby human frigate, the Guardian, simply ceased to exist as matter. One moment it was there. The next, a perfect, smooth-edged hollow of glowing vacuum filled the center of the ship, and the remains flew apart. Vance watched the Guardian die on the tactical feed, his knuckles white on the armrest. Report. When hell was that? Science Officer Eris, a man who spoke in rapid, clipped sentences, was already poring over the scrambled sensor data. Some form of localized reality failure. They didn't destroy the hull, they deleted it. The energy signature is off the scale, but it's short-ranged and requires a massive charge-up. They can't spam it. Eris, find me a weakness. Not in the weapon. In them. Vance turned to comms. Fleet-wide. New protocol. Evasive pattern stutter. No ship holds a vector for more than 3 seconds. Draw their big guns, make them waste shots. Resolve. We're the anvil. We go straight at the luminous recourse. The battle dissolved from a formal line into a desperate, chaotic ballet. The human ships darted and weaved with reckless, unpredictable burns, like insects avoiding a slow swiping hand. The Concordance ships, elegant and precise, struggled to track the chaotic patterns. Their predictive AIs, built for elegant, logical warfare, faltered. The silver beams of annihilation lashed out, each missing by narrower margins, vaporizing asteroids and painting space with deadly, beautiful light but claiming fewer ships. Meanwhile, the unyielding resolve plowed forward, a bull charging a matador. It absorbed punishing fire from the smaller Concordance beams. Its hull became a charred, pitted landscape, whole decks exposed to vacuum. But its core systems, its reactors, and its guns buried at the heart of the beast thundered on. It closed the distance to the luminous recourse, which was now powering its main weapon for another shot. It's targeting the colony transport Odyssey. Kira shouted. The massive, unarmed ship was struggling to flee, a sitting duck. Not today, Vance growled. Helm, ramming speed. Not us. Launch the bunker busters. From the Resolve's forward bays, a salvo of specialized missiles shot forth. They carried no warheads. Instead, they were solid durasteel spears, designed to crack planetary fortifications. The Concordance point defense lasers swatted them down, but there were too many coming too fast. Two impacted the luminous recourse's hull, not exploding, but punching deep into its superstructure, severing primary power conduits. The silver glow around its main weapon flickered and died. The ship began to list, internal explosions flowering against its silver skin. On the eternal dawn, Arbiter Solvanes felt a cold, unfamiliar sensation doubt. Their technology was superior in every quantifiable way. Yet they were losing. The humans fought not with harmony, but with a violent, dissonant adaptability. They used their ships as battering rams, sacrificed them as distractions, employed weapons of such crude simplicity they fell outside standard defense parameters. He reviewed the loss of the luminous recourse. The humans had not targeted the weapon. They had targeted the power supply with a physical intrusion. It was inelegant. It was effective. Arbiter, his subordinate, whispered, fear in its voice for the first time. The human flagship is broadcasting on all frequencies. Vance's face, smudged with soot and streaked with sweat, appeared on every Concordance screen. You came here to give us an order, he said, his voice raw but steady. You thought your pretty ships and your ancient names made you our masters. You thought we'd kneel. We don't kneel. We learn. We saw your energy shields, so we built guns that throw mountains. You have reality warpers? We have armor thick enough to say no. You call this a correction? This is a conversation, and you're not listening. He leaned closer to the pickup. You want us to submit? Then break us. But I'll show you what breaking looks like. Unyielding resolve. All remaining power to forward armor and engines. Target, the eternal dawn. You wanted a god to kill? Here we come. The battered dreadnought, trailing atmosphere and debris, turned its ruined prow toward the wounded Concordance flagship and began to accelerate. It was no longer a ship of war. It was a statement made of iron and rage hurled across the void. Silence, thick and disbelieving, gripped the bridge of the eternal dawn. The humans' words hung in the air, a vulgar defiance that resonated more powerfully than any plasma burst. Arbiter Solvanes watched the scarred behemoth on the viewer, its course a straight, suicidal line toward his heart. It was not a tactical maneuver. It was an act of pure, symbolic violence. For a species that communicated in subtle harmonics and layered meaning, the bluntness of it was horrifying. He intends a kinetic impact, the tactical officer stated, the obviousness of it somehow making it worse. Our shields are still not tuned. At his current velocity, the mass of his vessel, will rupture our core, Solvani's finished. He felt the cold tendrils of panic, not for his life, but for the paradigm. A god could be questioned, argued with, even disobeyed. But a god could not be rammed by a lesser being. It was undignified. It was impossible. Yet the sensor data scrolling before him confirmed the impossible was minutes away. All vessels converge on the human flagship. Disable its engines. Use gravity tethers, spatial shear fields. Do not let it reach us. The remaining Concordance ships broke formation, shedding their serene grace for frantic purpose. Beams of emerald light, gravity manipulators, lanced out, seeking to grasp the unyielding resolve. They latched onto its hull, and the dreadnought's forward surge slowed, its frame screaming as conflicting forces tried to tear it apart. Inside the resolve, alarms were a constant shriek. Gravity fluctuated wildly, throwing crew not strapped in against walls. "They're trying to pull us to pieces," Helm shouted, fighting the controls. "Ventral thrusters, max burn. Chun, target the sources of those beams. Use the point defense railguns." Vance ordered, his body straining against his restraints. The smaller, rapid-fire kinetic guns, designed to shred missiles, swiveled and spat streams of tungsten carbide at the sources of the gravity beams. They couldn't penetrate a Concordance hull deeply, but they could shatter delicate external emitter arrays. One by one, the emerald beams flickered and died. But the cost was immense. With every emitter destroyed, a barrage of conventional energy, fire punished the resolve. A hit to the port engine nacelle triggered a containment breach. The forced ejection of the reactor core stole 30% of their power and left a trail of crystallized plasma in their wake. The ship was dying, but its momentum, both physical and metaphorical, was undiminished. On the human fleet channels, a new voice crackled through. It was Commodore Thorne on the cruiser Steadfast, seeing their flagship's death charge. "All remaining vessels. Cover the resolve. Pattern Zulu. For Earth, for home. Intercept." What was left of the human border guard, a handful of cruisers, a swarm of gutted fighters, and the brave, fragile colony transport Odyssey, turned not to flee, but to attack. They threw themselves at the Concordance ships harrying the resolve. The Steadfast physically placed itself between a volley of quantum lasers and the resolve's exposed stern, its shields failing in a spectacular aurora of dying energy. Fighters, out of missiles, rammed Concordance sensor domes. The Odyssey, with no weapons, used its bulk to block firing lines, its civilian hull evaporating under the fire. It was not a battle of strategy. It was a sacrifice, a raw, screaming testament of no. Sol Vannies watched it unfold, and the cold doubt crystallized into a terrifying understanding. The humans were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for the right to be. Every ship they lost, every life spent, was a brick in a wall of defiance they were building between themselves and oblivion. His people had never encountered such a violently held concept of self. They curated. They guided. They did not exist with such furious intensity. The unyielding resolve, bleeding air, and fire was now within visual range. Its forward hull was a molten wreck, but behind it, the engines still burned with a sullen, determined fury. "Arbiter," the tactical officer's voice was hollow. "The human vessel. It will impact in 47 seconds. Evacuation is impossible." Sol Vannies looked at the approaching monument of human will. He keyed the fleet-wide channel, not to the humans, but to his own. "Cease fire. All vessels, withdraw to a safe distance." "Arbiter, this is not a victory to be claimed," Sol Vannies said, the words tasting of ash. "It is a truth to be witnessed. Let it be recorded that they chose annihilation over subjugation. Let it be known what that choice looks like." The Concordance ships disengaged, falling back with a stunned silence. They watched as the mortally wounded God-Killer, abandoned by its enemies, continued its final, lonely journey toward the flagship. Inside the unyielding resolve, the sudden cessation of fire was more disorienting than the battle. "They're backing off," Chen whispered, her voice cracking. Vance looked at the main viewer, at the pristine, eternal dawn growing larger. He saw the other Concordance ships retreating. A grim smile touched his lips. They're not backing off. They're getting out of the blast radius. They think this is over. He unstrapped himself, wincing at the pain in his ribs. Helm, kill main engines. Fire all starboard maneuvering thrusters. Change course, bearing 270 by 35. Sir, we'll miss the flagship. That's the point, Vance said, his voice carrying across the silent, ruined bridge. We don't need to kill them. We needed to show them we would. Now we show them something else. We show them we choose when to die. And it's not today. Take us toward the nebula. The dense one. Let's see if their pretty sensors can find us in there. The unyielding resolve, with its last breath of power, turned slowly away from the eternal dawn. It listed, crippled and dark, and began a slow, drifting journey toward the great, swirling cosmic cloud that marked the edge of the star system. A wounded beast seeking cover, having faced down a hunter and walked away. The unyielding resolve drifted into the embrace of the Tarantulan Nebula like a ghost entering a tomb. Ionized gases and hues of crimson and violet swirled around its scarred hull, swallowing it from the view of the stunned Galactic Concordance fleet. Inside, the air was thin, cold, and smelled of ozone, burnt wiring, and blood. Emergency lights cast long, desperate shadows. Of her crew of 2,000, less than 300 answered the roll call. Captain Elias Vance moved through the wreckage of his bridge, his steps echoing in the eerie quiet. The constant hum of the engines was gone, replaced by the creaks and groans of dying metal and the hiss of sealing patches on the hull. They were adrift, powered only by flickering backup batteries. A tomb in the making. On the eternal dawn, Arbiter Solvanes observed the nebula on his viewer, his 3 eyes narrowed. The human ship was hiding, but it was dead. Its energy signature was fading into the background radiation. A logical conclusion. The Defiance had ended in a slow, cold death. A fitting, quiet end. Yet, the Arbiter felt no satisfaction. The final act, the turning away, haunted him. It had not been a surrender. It had been a dismissal. The human had looked at godhood, chosen not to strike the final blow, and walked into the dark on his own terms. It was a power Solvanes did not understand. Monitor the nebula, he ordered, his voice lacking its former certainty. Scan for wreckage, and prepare a dispatch for the Concordance High Synod. The situation requires recontextualization. Days passed. Inside the nebula, the humans did not die. They fought a new, more intimate war. Engineers in patched environment suits crawled through radioactive corridors, bypassing shattered systems, rerouting power from life support to the single, least damaged sensor array. Medics worked in triage centers set up in the mess hall, saving who they could with dwindling supplies. They rationed water recycled from breath and sweat and food paste that tasted of despair. Vance called a council in the dimmed mess hall. His officers looked like survivors of a geologic catastrophe, faces drawn and soot-stained. They're still out there, watching, he said, his voice hoarse. They think we're dead. We have maybe a week of air left if we all stay in cryo, which we can't because we need to fix the comms. Science Officer Eris gestured to a cracked data slate. The nebula's radiation is scrambling their long-range scans, but it's also scrambling any signal we send. Our transmitters are toast. We need a lighthouse. Something big and simple. Kira Chin looked up, her eyes tired but sharp. The port side mass driver. The barrel is cracked, but the firing chamber and the primary magnetic coils and battery C are intact. We can't fire a slug, but what if we fired something else? Eris's eyes went wide. A sustained impulse. A raw, broadband burst of radio noise. Channel all our remaining power into the coils. Use the barrel as a waveguide. It would be a single, monstrous shout. Every sensor from here to the galactic core would hear it. But, Captain, it would burn out the system completely. It's our last card. Vance looked at the faces around him. The stubborn, dirty, brilliant faces of the people who had stared down gods. "What's the message?" A young comms ensign, her arm in a sling, spoke softly. "Just our coordinates." And one word. What word? Alive. The decision was made. For the next 48 hours, the crew of the Unyielding Resolve worked with a silent, frantic purpose. They were no longer fighting the Concordance. They were fighting entropy itself. They disconnected every non-essential system, running wires through hallways like veins, feeding the last dregs of power from dying batteries into the gutted heart of Battery C. On the eternal dawn, the sensors pinged. Arbiter, a power surge from within the nebula. Massive but chaotic. It is not weapons fire. It resembles a system's collapse or a reactor breach. Solvanes felt a pang of something almost like regret. So the end had come. Record the energy signature for the sensor console lit up with a furious, blazing alert. A wave of pure electromagnetic noise, titanic in scale and utterly unstructured, erupted from the nebula. It was not a message. It was a roar, a raw, technological scream that overloaded delicate concordance receivers and painted their screens with static. Buried in the chaos, repeating on a loop, was a simple, stark data packet, the Resolve's coordinates, and the word, alive. On the bridge of the drifting dreadnought, every light died as the last jewel of power surged into the makeshift transmitter. The ship was utterly dark, silent, and cold. In the command chair, Vance waited in the perfect blackness, breathing slowly, listening to the beat of his own heart. A new light appeared on the main viewer, which was dead. Then, he realized it wasn't on the viewer. It was outside. A soft, blue glow permeated the nebula's gas. Then another, and another. Ships, but not the leaf-shaped vessels of the Concordance. These were blocky, utilitarian, scarred by haste. Hulls painted with the sigils of the Earth Federated Navy's Third Fleet. The vanguard of the human response, who had heard the crude, glorious shout of their lost kin. A tractor beam, gentle and solid, locked onto the Unyielding Resolve's hull. A communication, on old-fashioned radio, crackled through the cold air of the bridge. Unyielding Resolve. This is Captain Rios of the EFS Titan's Forge. We heard you. Hold on, brothers and sisters. We're bringing you home. Outside, the Concordance fleet, having observed the entire event, hung motionless. Solvanes watched the rough, ugly human ships tend to their wounded champion. He saw the careful, fierce urgency in their movements. There was no elegance here, only a relentless, connective will. They did not leave their own behind, even when it was logical to do so. He opened a channel to the retreating human fleet and to the Titan's forge. He spoke not in the melodic tones of a god, but in the careful, newly learned language of a being who had just seen the limits of his own understanding. This is Arbiter Solvanes of the Galactic Concordance. The correction is concluded. A delegation will be sent to your designated world of Earth to discuss terms. The word terms was foreign on his tongue. They had never discussed terms before. On the dark bridge of the Unyielding Resolve, a single battery-powered lamp flickered on. Vance listened to the Arbiter's words, then to the cheers of his rescued crew echoing through the ship from the open comms. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of a galaxy on his shoulders feeling just a little lighter. They had not won a war. They had shattered an idea. And from the pieces, something new would have to be built. Not by gods, but by beings flawed, mortal, and unyieldingly alive.